Hey guys, tonight we're going to slow things down and sit with a story that matters. James Carter, a 52-year-old black man, carries the weight of Sacramento's internal affairs with quiet grace. Behind his steady gaze lies a battle against prejudice, one that erupts on a twilight drive home when a routine traffic stop becomes a test of dignity. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe, but only if stories like this truly move you. Comment your city and the time you're watching. Now close your eyes or don't, it's your choice. Either way, you're about to witness something real. The Sacramento skyline fades into a wash of amber as James Carter eases his sedan through the city's pulse. The radio hums softly, a jazz melody weaving through the hum of evening traffic. At 52, James carries himself with the poise of a man who's seen the world's edges and chosen to walk its center. His tailored suit, crisp despite a long day, speaks of professionalism. His eyes, deep and unyielding, hint at a strength forged in fire. As head of the Sacramento Police Department's internal affairs, he's a guardian of accountability, though few know the depth of his authority. Tonight, he's just a man heading home, the weight of his badge tucked away in his wallet. The urban sprawl of J Street buzzes with life. Neon signs flicker above taquerias, and pedestrians weave past bus stops. James adjusts his rearview mirror, catching the glint of his own reflection. A yellow light glows ahead, and he slows the sedan's tires, whispering against the asphalt. The light shifts to red, and he stops, fingers tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm of Coltrane's saxophone. Then a sharp wail pierces the air. Blue and red lights erupt in his mirror, a police cruiser's siren slicing through the evening's calm. James's brow furrows, but his hands remain steady. He eases the car to the curb, the cruiser pulling in behind him with a predatory lurch. Officer Mark Hensley steps out, his silhouette sharp against the cruiser's flashing lights. Mid-30s with a buzz cut and a badge that gleams like a challenge, Hensley moves with the swagger of unchecked power. His boots crunch on the pavement, each step deliberate, as if he's already decided the outcome of this encounter. James lowers his window, the cool evening air mingling with the faint scent of exhaust. Hensley leans in, his eyes narrowing as he scans James's face, his suit the interior of the sedan. License and registration, he says, his voice flat but edged with something sharper, like a blade testing its mark. James reaches for the glove compartment, his movements slow and deliberate. "Here you go, officer," he says, handing over the documents. His tone is even polite, but there's a quiet firmness that lingers like a stone beneath still water. Hensley takes the papers, his gaze lingering on James's hands, as if expecting a flinch, a tremor. Anything to justify his scrutiny. "Know why I pulled you over?" Hensley asks, leaning closer, his breath faintly sour with coffee. "Not entirely sure," James replies, his eyes meeting Hensley's without wavering. "I stopped at the light." His voice carries no defiance, only clarity, but it seems to unsettle Hensley. The officer's lips twitch, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You didn't stop in time," he says, though his tone wavers, as if the accusation is an afterthought. He steps back, folding James's license with exaggerated care, his eyes never leaving the man in the driver's seat. "You're not from around here, are you?" James tilts his head slightly, a faint crease forming at the corner of his mouth. "My address is on the license, officer. I've lived here 6 months." His words are measured, but they carry a weight that shifts the air between them. Hensley's posture stiffens, his hand drifting to his belt, a reflex of control. "Where you headed in such a hurry?" He presses his voice, taking on an edge, as if James's calm is a personal affront. "Home," James says simply, his gaze steady. "Long day." The simplicity of the answer seems to irritate Hensley further. He paces a small circle, his boots scraping the asphalt, his eyes flicking between James and the sedan. The street hums with distant traffic, but here on this stretch of J Street, the world narrows to the two men and the unspoken tension crackling between them. Hensley stops, his hand resting on his holster, a gesture that feels more like theater than necessity. "Step out of the car," he orders, his voice clipped, the words landing like a gauntlet. James's fingers tighten briefly on the steering wheel, a subtle ripple of tension in his otherwise calm exterior. "Is there a reason for that?" "Officer," he asks, his tone still even, but with a quiet challenge woven into it. Hensley's eyes narrow at his jaw tightening. "I said step out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The threat hangs heavy, unspoken but unmistakable. James exhales slowly, his breath a faint mist in the cooling air. He opens the door and steps out, his polished shoes gleaming under the streetlights. At 6 feet, he stands slightly taller than Hensley, his shoulders broad but unthreatening, his suit a stark contrast to the officer's utility belt and badge. Hensley gestures toward the front of the sedan, hands where I can see them. James complies his movements, deliberate, his palms open and steady. The neon glow of a nearby diner casts jagged shadows across the scene, painting James's face in hues of red and blue. "This about the light or something else?" James asks, his voice low, cutting through the hum of the cruiser's idling engine. The question lands like a stone in still water, and for a moment, Hensley's composure falters. His eyes flick to James's suit, his polished demeanor, and something shifts in his gaze, suspicion hardening into prejudice. "Just routine," Hensley mutters, but his voice lacks conviction. "We've had incidents around here. Can't be too careful." He steps closer, his boots inches from James's shoes, his breath visible in the evening chill. James turns his head slightly, meeting Hensley's gaze. "Incidents involving men in suits driving home." He asks, his tone calm but piercing like a blade sliding beneath armor. Hensley's lips part but no words come. His hand twitches near his holster, a reflex of discomfort, as if James's quiet strength is a language he can't decipher. Some truths linger, waiting to be unveiled. James stands still, his hands steady, his eyes locked on Hensley's. The officer's swagger falters, replaced by a flicker of unease, as if he senses the ground shifting beneath him. The streetlights hum, casting long shadows that stretch across the pavement, heavy with the weight of what's to come. James's calm is not surrender. It's a storm held in check, and Hensley, unaware, is stepping into its path. The encounter feels like a microcosm of a larger truth, one James has faced too many times before. In Sacramento's diverse tapestry, where Black professionals navigate corporate boardrooms and community barbecues alike, prejudice lingers like a stubborn stain. James's role in internal affairs has taught him to see it clearly: the glances that linger too long, the assumptions that harden into action. Yet he carries himself with a dignity that refuses to bend a quiet rebellion against a world that too often demands he prove his worth. His silence now, as Hensley's eyes bore into him, is not weakness, but a choice, a refusal to let anger dictate the moment. Hensley, oblivious to the man he's facing, doubles down. "You seem awfully calm for someone in your position," he says, his voice laced with mockery. "Got something to hide?" James's jaw tightens, a faint tremor of restraint, but his eyes remain steady like a lighthouse in a storm. "Nothing to hide, officer," he says, his voice soft but unyielding. "Just a man trying to get home." The words carry a weight that Hensley can't grasp, a reminder of the humanity he's chosen to ignore. The officer steps back, his hand still on his holster, his confidence a fragile mask. The night stretches on, and James's shadow, long and unyielding, holds its ground. The neon glow of J Street's diner flickers across James Carter's face as he stands by his sedan, hands steady under Officer Mark Hensley's scrutiny. The air hums with the weight of unspoken prejudice, the cruiser's red and blue lights pulsing like a heartbeat. Hensley's boots scrape the asphalt, his gaze sharp with suspicion, as if James's calm is a puzzle he's determined to break. The officer's earlier swagger has hardened into something uglier, fueled by assumptions that have no place in the fading Sacramento twilight. James, at 52, knows this script too well, knows the way a routine stop can spiral when bias takes the wheel. Hensley paces a slow circle around James, his hand hovering near his holster, a gesture more about dominance than safety. "You're too calm," he says, his voice low, almost a growl. "Most people would be nervous by now." James's eyes follow him, steady and unblinking, like a man watching a storm gather. "No reason to be nervous, officer," he replies, his tone even, but with a quiet edge that cuts through the evening's hum. "I'm just standing here following your instructions." The words are simple, but they land like a challenge, and Hensley's jaw tightens, his lips curling into a faint sneer. "Turn around," Hensley orders, pointing to the sedan's hood. Hands on the car. James exhales softly, a faint mist in the cooling air, and complies, his palms pressing against the warm metal. The diner's neon sign casts jagged red shadows across his suit, a stark contrast to the polished professionalism he carries. Hensley steps closer, his boots inches from James's heels, and begins a rough pat-down, his hands lingering longer than necessary, as if searching for a reason to escalate. "You don't belong here," Hensley mutters, the words slipping out raw with prejudice. James's shoulders stiffen, a subtle ripple of tension, but he holds his silence, his face a mask of restraint. The search is invasive, a deliberate attempt to provoke, but James doesn't flinch. His fingers curl slightly against the hood, a quiet tremor of anger held in check. He's faced this before on Sacramento streets and corporate boardrooms, even at community cookouts, where neighbors' smiles sometimes hid suspicion. As internal affairs chief, he's seen the damage of unchecked bias the way it festers in systems meant to protect. Yet here under Hensley's hands, he's reduced to a stereotype, his dignity a target. Still he chooses calm, a rebellion woven into his stillness, a refusal to let this moment define him. Hensley steps back, his search yielding nothing but frustration. "You're clean," he says, the words begrudging as if he's disappointed. James turns slowly, his eyes locking onto Hensley's, with a quiet intensity that makes the officer shift his weight. "Of course I am," James says, his voice soft but piercing, like a blade sliding beneath armor. "Now, officer, are we done here?" The question hangs in the air, a subtle shift in power that Hensley can't ignore. His sneer falters, replaced by a flicker of unease, as if he senses the ground trembling beneath his authority. "Not done." Hensley snaps, his voice rising, betraying his need to reclaim control. "You know a lot about how this works, don't you? What are you, some kind of lawyer?" He steps closer, invading James's space, his breath heavy with coffee and defiance. James folds his arms, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. "Not a lawyer," he says, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just someone who's learned a few things." The ambiguity unsettles Hensley, his eyes narrowing as he tries to read the man before him. "You think you're smarter than me," he says, his voice dropping to a near growl. James meets his gaze unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer," he says, his words deliberate, each one landing like a stone in still water. "I just believe in fairness, not seeing much of it here." The statement is calm, but it cuts deep, exposing the prejudice Hensley hasn't named. The officer's face reddens, his hand twitching toward his holster, a reflex of discomfort. "Watch your mouth," he says, but the words lack conviction, as if he's grasping at a script that no longer fits. James's calm is a mirror reflecting Hensley's flaws back at him, and the officer doesn't like what he sees. Some truths linger, waiting to be unveiled. The street hums with distant traffic, but here on this neon-lit stretch of J Street, the world narrows to the two men and the electric tension between them. James's shadow stretches long across the pavement, heavy with unspoken resolve, a silent promise that this moment is far from over. Hensley, oblivious to the storm he's provoked, doubles down. "You're not going anywhere until I say so," he says, his voice sharp, but there's a crack in his confidence, a hint of doubt creeping in. James's eyes never waver, his calm a fortress, and Hensley for the first time feels the weight of his own misjudgment. The encounter ripples beyond the two men, touching the fabric of Sacramento's diverse community. In a city where Black professionals navigate corporate towers and neighborhood barbecues, prejudice is a quiet undercurrent surfacing in moments like this. James's role in internal affairs has shown him the cost of silence, officers who bend the rules, systems that shield them, communities left to bear the scars. His restraint now is not just personal, it's a stand against a larger truth, a refusal to let bias write the ending. The diner's neon flickers, casting red and blue across his face, a reminder of the lights that frame this injustice and the strength it takes to face them. Hensley paces again, his boots scraping the asphalt, his frustration palpable. "You're too confident," he mutters almost to himself, as if James's poise is a personal affront. "Like you know something I don't." James tilts his head slightly, his eyes sharp with quiet authority. "Confidence isn't the issue, officer," he says, his voice low, resonant. "Respect is." The words land like a verdict, and Hensley freezes, his hand falling away from his holster. For a moment, the officer looks smaller, his authority fraying under the weight of James's gaze. The night stretches on, the neon lights humming, and James's shadow holds its ground, a silent testament to a strength Hensley can't comprehend. The Sacramento twilight deepens J Street's neon signs, casting a restless glow over James Carter's sedan. Officer Mark Hensley stands inches from James, his boots planted firmly on the asphalt, but his confidence frays like a worn thread. James' hand still resting lightly on the car's hood, meets the officer's glare with a steady gaze, his calm, a quiet rebellion against the prejudice pulsing through this encounter. The cruiser's lights flash red and blue, painting jagged shadows across James's suit, a stark reminder of the power imbalance Hensley wields or thinks he does. At 52, James knows the cost of this moment, not just for him, but for every black man who's faced the same scrutiny on these streets. Hensley's voice cuts through the hum of distant traffic, sharp with frustration. "You think you can talk your way out of this," he says, leaning closer, his breath heavy with the stale bite of coffee. James's jaw tightens, a faint ripple of restraint, but his eyes remain unyielding like a lighthouse weathering a storm. "I'm not talking my way out of anything. Officer," he replies, his voice low, deliberate, "I'm asking for clarity. What's this really about?" The question hangs in the air, a blade slicing through Hensley's pretense, and the officer's sneer falters, replaced by a flicker of unease. Hensley steps back, his hand twitching near his holster, a reflex of control slipping away. "You're too smart for your own good," he mutters, pacing a tight circle around James. The neon glow of the nearby diner catches his badge, making it gleam like a false crown. "People like you always think they're above the law." The words slip out raw with prejudice, and James's shoulders stiffen, a subtle shift that carries the weight of 1,000 such moments. He turns slowly, facing Hensley, directly, his palms open but his gaze piercing. "People like me." He repeats, his voice soft but charged, each word a stone dropped into still water. "Care to explain that, officer?" The challenge lands like a spark in dry grass, and Hensley's face reddens, his lips parting, but no words coming. He's crossed a line and he knows it, but pride keeps him from retreating. "You know what I mean?" he says, his voice lower, less certain, as if he's trying to convince himself. James's eyes narrow slightly, a quiet storm gathering behind them. "I think I do," he says, his tone calm but razor sharp, cutting through the officer's bravado. "And I think we both know this stopped being about a traffic light a long time ago." The words are a mirror reflecting Hensley's bias back at him, and the officer shifts his weight, discomfort creeping into his stance. Some truths linger, waiting to be unveiled. James's shadow stretches long across the pavement, heavy with the resolve of a man who's faced this script before. In Sacramento's diverse mosaic, where black professionals navigate corporate corridors and community potlucks, prejudice is a stubborn undercurrent, surfacing in glances, assumptions, and moments like this. As internal affairs chief, James has seen its damage officers who bend the rules systems that shield them in communities left to bear the scars. His restraint now is a choice, a refusal to let anger write the ending, but it's also a strategy, a quiet gathering of strength for the reckoning to come. Hensley, oblivious to the man he's facing, doubles down. "You're not going anywhere," he says, his voice sharp but cracking at the edges. "Not until I'm satisfied." He gestures toward the sedan, as if searching for a justification he hasn't yet found. "Pop, say, the trunk." James raises an eyebrow, a flicker of incredulity crossing his face. "The trunk," he repeats, his tone measured, but tinged with disbelief. "You think I'm hiding something in there, officer, in my suit, driving home from work?" The question is calm, but it carries a weight that makes Hensley pause, his hand hovering over his radio, as if debating whether to call for backup. The street hums with life, pedestrians glancing curiously from the sidewalk, a taco truck's radio spilling salsa music into the night. But here on this stretch of J Street, the world narrows to the two men and the electric tension between them. James complies, moving slowly to the driver's side, his polished shoes gleaming under the streetlights. He pops the trunk, revealing nothing but a briefcase and a neatly folded jacket. Hensley peers inside, his frustration palpable, his search yielding no excuse to escalate further. "You're wasting my time," he mutters, slamming the trunk shut, the sound echoing like a gavel in the quiet night. James steps back, folding his arms, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with quiet authority. "Am I, officer?" he asks, his voice low, resonant. "Or are you wasting mine?" The question is a turning point, a subtle shift in power that Hensley can't ignore. The officer's face twitches, a mix of anger and uncertainty, as if he's realizing this encounter isn't unfolding as he planned. "You've got a mouth on you," he says, but the words lack conviction, his swagger unraveling under James's unwavering gaze. For the first time, Hensley looks smaller, his badge, a fragile shield against the man he's underestimated. The encounter is a microcosm of a larger truth one James has carried through decades of navigating Sacramento's streets. In a city where black men are too often seen as threats before they're seen as neighbors, James's role in internal affairs is both a shield and a sword. He's investigated officers like Hensley, men who let bias guide their hands, who mistake authority for invincibility. Yet here under the neon glow, he's just a driver, his dignity a target. His calm is not surrender. It's a fortress built from years of facing down prejudice with grace. The diner's lights flicker, casting red and blue across his face, a reminder of the stakes and the strength it takes to hold steady. Hensley, sensing the shift, tries to reclaim control. "You're not special," he says, his voice rising, a desperate grab at dominance. "I deal with guys like you every day." James tilts his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not of amusement, but of clarity. "That's the problem, officer," he says, his words slow, deliberate. "You deal with guys like me without seeing who we are." The statement lands like a verdict, and Hensley freezes his hand, falling away from his radio. For a moment, the officer looks lost, his authority a crumbling facade. The night stretches on, and James's shadow, long and unyielding, holds its ground, a silent promise of what's to come. The neon-lit pulse of J Street hums with restless energy, its diner signs casting a fractured glow across James Carter's sedan. Officer Mark Hensley stands rigid, his boots rooted to the asphalt, but his confidence splinters under James's unyielding gaze. The cruiser's red and blue lights carve stark shadows, painting James's suit in hues of defiance. At 52, James carries the weight of Sacramento's internal affairs with a quiet authority few suspect, least of all Hensley, whose prejudice has turned a routine stop into a crucible. The air crackles with tension, the moment teetering on the edge of revelation. Hensley's voice slices through the night, sharp but fraying. "You're not running this show," he says, stepping closer, his hand twitching near his holster. "I say when we're done." James, still by the sedan's hood, folds his arms, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp like a blade catching light. "You've said a lot." "Officer," he replies, his tone low, deliberate, each word a stone dropped into still water. "But none of it explains why I'm here, hands on my car trunk open instead of heading home." The challenge lands, and Hensley's sneer twists his face, reddening as he grapples for control. "You think you're clever?" Hensley snaps, his voice rising, betraying a crack in his bravado. "Guys like you always do." The phrase raw with prejudice hangs heavy, and James's jaw tightens, a subtle tremor of restraint. He steps forward, closing the gap. Hensley's swagger once claimed, his polished shoes gleaming under the streetlights. "Guys like me," he repeats, his voice soft but electric, charged with a clarity that cuts through the officer's pretense. "You mean black men driving home, or just men you can't intimidate?" The words are a mirror reflecting Hensley's bias back at him, and the officer flinches, his hand hovering over his radio as if backup could shield him from the truth. Hensley's eyes narrow, but doubt creeps into his stance, his boots shifting on the asphalt. "Don't twist my words," he mutters, but the conviction is gone, his authority unraveling like a frayed rope. James's gaze never wavers, his calm, a fortress built from years of facing down prejudice with grace. "I'm not twisting anything." "Officer," he says, his voice steady, resonant, "you've made it clear what this is about, and it's not a traffic light." The statement lands like a gavel, and Hensley's face pales, his lips parting, but no words coming. The street hums, pedestrians whispering from the sidewalk, a taco truck's radio spilling faint salsa notes. But here the world narrows to the two men and the reckoning unfolding. Some truths linger, waiting to be unveiled. James's shadow stretches long across the pavement, heavy with the resolve of a man who's carried this burden too long. In Sacramento's diverse tapestry, where black professionals navigate corporate towers and neighborhood barbecues, prejudice is a quiet blade cutting in moments like this. As internal affairs chief, James has seen its cost: officers who wield power without accountability, systems that shield them, communities left scarred. His restraint now is not surrender. It's a strategy, a gathering storm. The diner's neon flickers, casting red and blue across his face, a reminder of the lights framing this injustice, and the power he holds to shift the narrative. Hensley, sensing the shift, doubles down, his voice, desperate to reclaim dominance. "You're nobody," he says, but the words sound hollow, a last grasp at control. "I don't care who you think you are." James tilts his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not of amusement, but of certainty. "You should," he says, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet it carries the weight of a verdict. He reaches into his jacket, his movements slow, deliberate, watching Hensley's hand twitch toward his holster. "I'm reaching for my badge," Officer James says, his tone calm, measured. "No need for dramatics. You'll want to see this." The words hang in the air, heavy with promise, and Hensley freezes, his eyes locked on James's hand. James pulls out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming badge, its surface catching the neon glow. James Carter, he says, his voice steady, resonant, as if introducing himself to history. Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division. The revelation lands like thunder, and Hensley's face drains his swagger, collapsing into stunned silence. His eyes dart to the badge, then back to James's face, searching for a lie, but there's only quiet authority, a dignity that shatters every assumption he's made. Internal Affairs. Hensley repeats, his voice cracking barely a whisper. His hand falls away from his holster, his shoulders sagging, as the weight of his misjudgment crashes down. James steps closer, his badge still raised, his eyes piercing. "That's right," he says, his tone calm but unrelenting. "My job is to ensure officers uphold the integrity this badge represents. And tonight, Officer Hensley, you've shown me exactly how far you've strayed." The words are not angry, but they carry the force of an indictment, each one stripping away Hensley's facade. The officer stumbles back, his boots scraping the asphalt, as if the ground itself is pulling him under. James lowers the badge, tucking it back into his wallet, but his gaze never leaves Hensley. "The most troubling part of this," he says, his voice softening, almost reflective, "is that you didn't just profile me. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I couldn't challenge you. And why? Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect." He pauses, letting the words sink in his shadow, stretching longer, heavier, a silent testament to the truth. "That's not just a problem for me, officer. It's a problem for everyone you encounter in that uniform." Hensley's face reddens, his lips parting, but no defense comes. He's a man staring into a mirror he can't escape. "Here's what happens next," James says, his voice firm, cutting through the night's hum. "You return my documents, step back, and think carefully about what you say. Because you'll hear from me again, not as a driver you stopped, but as the man who decides if you're fit to wear that badge." The promise is calm, but it lands like a sentence, and Hensley's hands tremble as he reaches into his pocket, pulling out James's license and registration. He hands them over, his eyes, avoiding James's, his authority, a shattered thing. James takes the documents, tucking them away, and steps toward his sedan, pausing with one hand on the door. "Remember this, officer," he says, his voice low, resonant. "A badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." The neon lights flicker, casting red and blue across the scene, a tableau of justice unfolding. James slides into his sedan, the engine humming to life, and pulls away, leaving Hensley standing alone, his shadow small against the cruiser's glow. The officer's face is a mask of shock, his future uncertain, but for James, this is only the beginning. The night stretches on, and his shadow, long and unyielding, carries the promise of change. The Sacramento dawn breaks soft and gold, its light filtering through the blinds of James Carter's office in the Internal Affairs Division. The hum of J Street lingers in his mind, the neon glow of that fateful stop, now a distant echo, but its weight remains a catalyst carved into his resolve. At 52, James sits at his desk, his suit crisp, his badge resting beside a stack of files. Officer Mark Hensley's name stares up from an open folder, a single thread in a tapestry of systemic flaws James is determined to unravel. The city wakes outside its pulse, a blend of hope and tension, and James, with quiet strength, prepares to shift its rhythm. The office is a sanctuary of order, polished wood, muted grays, a faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. James leans back, his fingers steepled, his eyes tracing the sunlight's dance across the desk. The encounter with Hensley wasn't unique. It was a symptom, a flare of prejudice that thrives in unchecked corners. As head of internal affairs, James has seen the cost officers who wield power like a club, communities fractured by distrust. Black men like him reduced to threats before they're seen as neighbors. Yet his calm, forged in decades of navigating Sacramento's streets, is a rebellion, a refusal to let anger write the ending. A knock interrupts his thoughts. Linda, his assistant, steps in, her arms laden with reports. "Morning, Mr. Carter," she says, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "Chief Daniels wants a word about the department review, and here's last month's misconduct data." James nods, taking the files, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "Thanks, Linda. Schedule me with Daniels this afternoon." She hesitates, sensing the gravity in his tone, then slips out, leaving him with the weight of his mission. The files detail Hensley's record: minor complaints, excessive stops, vague misunderstandings swept under the rug. James's jaw tightens, a quiet tremor of resolve. Hensley isn't the disease. He's a symptom, and James is done treating symptoms. The morning unfolds in a flurry of meetings, each one a step toward accountability. James sits across from Chief Daniels in a conference room, the older man's salt and pepper hair catching the light. Daniels listens, his hands clasped, as James recounts the stop, his voice steady but resonant. Hensley's behavior wasn't just personal. James says his words deliberate, each one a stone in a growing foundation. It's a reflection of what we've let slide: training that skims the surface, protocols that protect the wrong people. Daniels rubs his temples, exhaling slowly. Larson's name has come up before, he admits, his voice heavy. We handled it quietly. James leans forward, his eyes piercing. Quiet doesn't fix this, Chief. Quiet lets it fester. Some truths linger, waiting to be unveiled. James's shadow stretches long, not just across his office, but across Sacramento's diverse heart, its corporate towers, its neighborhood barbecues, its streets where prejudice too often walks unchecked. His dignity unbowed on J Street is a spark, and now he fans it into flame. I'm proposing a department-wide review, he says, his voice calm but unyielding. Not just officers, but training accountability culture. If we don't hold ourselves higher, how can we ask the community to trust us? Daniels meets his gaze, the weight of the moment etched into his face. You'll stir a hornet's nest, he says, but there's a flicker of respect in his eyes. Good, James replies, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It's time. The weeks that follow are a whirlwind. James works tirelessly compiling data, meeting officers, holding public forums where residents, Black, Latino, Asian, white, voice their fears and hopes. The Hensley incident becomes a rallying cry, a moment that forces the department to face its flaws. At an internal hearing, James sits across from Hensley, the officer's face pale, his swagger gone. Hensley's suspension is swift, but James knows punishment isn't the victory. Prevention is. He pushes for reforms: bias training that digs deep, protocols that prioritize transparency, systems that hold officers accountable, not just to their badge, but to the people they serve. Months later, James stands at a community event, a modest hall packed with officers, city officials, and residents. The air hums with anticipation, the crowd a mosaic of skepticism and hope. He steps to the podium, his badge gleaming under the lights, his suit a testament to the dignity he's carried through every storm. Justice isn't just about catching the bad guys, he says, his voice resonating, slow and deliberate, each word a brushstroke on a larger canvas. It's about ensuring those sworn to protect do so with integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone, no matter who they are or where they're driving. The words land like a promise, and the applause rises, thunderous but fleeting, a ripple in the long work ahead. James steps down, his shadow stretching long across the hall, heavy with quiet victory. In a nation built on second chances, his stand on J Street was more than a moment. It was a turning point, a reminder that dignity can reshape systems, that resilience can rewrite narratives. He glances at the crowd, faces lit with cautious hope, and knows change won't come overnight. But it will come, carried on the backs of those who refuse to bend, who face prejudice with grace, and demand accountability with courage. His badge, once a silent shield, is now a beacon, and for James that's enough. The neon lights of J Street fade, but their lesson endures. Justice demands not just strength, but the quiet resolve to stand tall always.